Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, a series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And today we are looking at Pink Floyd's 1979 album, The Wall. Now, The Wall was released in 1979 under the Columbia label with various producers, art direction Gerald Scarfe and Roger Waters, with nationality UK, and a running time of 81 minutes and 11 seconds. A double album, actually. Now, The Wall is, at its core, a concept album, and a concept album that is very heavily focused on this character known as Pink. And the story that revolves around Pink and is developed throughout this entire album is extremely concrete and very, very strong to its core, as every single song adds to it, and there really isn't any filler that distracts from the narrative of the story here. And it's also important to note that the narrative and the character Pink is paralleling the past member of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett, who used to be the frontman of the group before fame got to his head, as well as drugs, and it drove him to the point of insanity, and he had to self-isolate himself, having rarely ever gone into the public eye again because of this sort of mental illness that was consuming him so greatly. And this sort of self-isolation and mental illness is definitely put in depth throughout this entire album in every single track, as Pink goes through the exact same thing. And this isn't the first time that Pink Floyd has honored Syd Barrett in some way or another by making music that is sort of referencing or honoring him as a person, because he was a great friend to the band and obviously an important member in creating who they were today. For example, Wish You Were Here has the song Shine On Crazy Diamond, which is another reference and honorable song to Syd Barrett. But going on, this album does kick things off with the song In the Flesh. It's important to note the question mark here, which is really just a fantastic rock song that really introduces Pink to the audience here, and he sort of invites us into his mind. He's telling us that if you really want to know the furthest extent of his story, the only way to do that is to see things through his eyes and sort of be taken in to his past. So this really is just an introductory track to sort of set up the rest of the album, but it is a great track for it because this is a great way to kick things off with rock influences and not going the more, I guess I'd say, alternative route that some of this album sort of delves into. Following that track, we have the song The Thin Ice, which is not really jumping too much into the story, but is giving, again, a bit more background, and is almost like a thesis in a way, making an argument of sorts that the most important thing in life to maintain your mental stability is a concrete set of friends and family. Pink ends up having the very opposite of friends and families throughout his life, and because of this, it does end up putting him on thin ice for his mental well-being. He's always on the brink of falling through into the depths of his insanity. This is a short song, which is very common throughout this entire album, but sometimes the short songs on here are also the most interesting or the strongest ones available, because they really do continually build upon this album, much like the wall that is building throughout this thing. And speaking of the wall that is building, the third song introduces the wall. It is the first track to really concretely state that there is a wall for Pink that is being built. And this time the wall that is being built is the death of Pink's father, as he had died in the war in World War II, and as a result has begun the production of the wall in a way. This is the first of many tracks, obviously, to talk about the wall and really add more and more bricks to it. And speaking of these bricks that are being placed in the wall, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, again, continues this wall being built, and this time it continues off the previous song, which is The Happiest Days of Our Lives. Continuing the narrative of a brick being added to the wall, this brick is now because of his childhood abuse from his teachers in school and the very strict teachings that they sort of employed onto the students. They were very much verbally and physically abused as students to sort of continue to work hard and basically be pure students or the best students they could possibly be. But as a result, this only further implements self-isolation and almost like a self-hatred of sorts in Pink's life. The track Mother is one of the most underrated tracks, I think, of Pink Floyd's discography, because I don't really hear many people talk about it, but it is one of my favorites by far, because Pink's Mother is not only another brick in the wall, but is arguably the foundation for the wall entirely. Her overprotective and constantly controlling behavior of Pink is what ends up making him fear the world and the outside world in general. Her fears and her paranoia of all the bad in the world is employed deeply into Pink's life and is really the catalyst for this entire wall and self-isolation that he goes through. This point is driven home greatly by the lyrics, as he is constantly asking his mother questions and trying to seek approval from her and whether or not he is making the right choices and whether or not things are safe. She's the only one to him who can really give him the comfortability of life, and because of this, she's the only thing that really concretely can keep him together. But that's not a great thing to have, because that means he doesn't trust or believe in anything else, really. Pink never gets to experience life the way he should experience it because his mother has so much control over it. Without a father around, it makes sense that his mother would have this sort of persona and would take on the role of almost a father and mother figure and protect him so heavily. But this ends up doing more damage than good to Pink, and again, is the foundation for this entire wall being built at all. Easily one of my favorite songs on this album. Moving along this album, we have the song One of My Turns, which is where Pink learns of his wife's infidelity and, as a result, brings a groupie back to his room, pushing him further into a deeper depression and a self-isolating way. He has this moment with this groupie where, instead of having meaningless sex with her, he ends up having a mental breakdown within the room and breaking everything and kicking her out. He's completely snapping in this song, and you really hear it in the instrumentals and the way it completely shifts. The first half of this song and the second half of this song are completely contrasted purely by volume, whereas the first half is much softer instrumentally and vocally, and he is speaking much more gently about both his wife and to this groupie, and then the second half of this song, he is just lashing out along with the instrumentals, and he sounds really unhinged in this song vocally. He really sounds like a man breaking down, and that's why I like this song so much, because it continues to build upon this narrative so strongly. And right after this breakdown, we have the song Don't Leave Me Now, where Pink is now completely done his breakdown, and he is now pleading and begging for the love of his life, his wife, to take him back. And it is really depressing and really sad, and there's so much desperation in his voice that you really can't help but feel for Pink and feel a sense of both pity and sympathy. He'll take her back even if her love isn't really real, because he is so desperate for just any sort of connection with anyone. And then finally, to close out the first half of this album, we have the two songs Another Brick in the Wall Part 3 and Goodbye Cruel World, where Pink now adds the last and final brick to his wall, completing the construction of this self-isolation, and this brick is obviously a cause of his wife leaving him for another man. Goodbye Cruel World obviously being sort of his final goodbye to the world, as he's completely cut off all connection with the public eye and has self-isolated himself away in his room. Now honestly, this is where I'd be okay with the album sort of ending, with Pink sort of isolating himself away and giving up on life in general, as depressing and as sad as that is. Because the second half of this album is where things begin to a bit become messy, I would say. Hey You is one of my least favorite songs off of this album, even though I do enjoy it quite a bit, but even still, I still find it to be rather dull and uninteresting vocally and performance-wise. I think the band doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table here, and being one of the longer tracks on here, it doesn't really add too much depth to the song or album. And if I were to rate this song individually, I'd still give it like an 8. Like, it's still a very good song, it's just that it's not my favorite among this album, and it really does stick out as a moment of almost dull, uninspired storytelling. And maybe that's only because it starts right after some of the strongest moments of the entire album. And so no matter what, any song placed here could have felt kind of weak, but I don't know, Hey You just doesn't do a whole lot for me personally. But I do like the song Nobody Home, where Pink, being isolated now in his hotel room, is recounting everything in the room around him. He talks about his book of poetry, and he talks about all the objects that he can see in his range, and it's almost like Pink is sort of still grasping onto reality in some way by pointing out all these things surrounding him. It is the last hope that he has, and all that he has left is these possessions. There's a lot of beauty in this track, as even though he's completely in the depths of despair, he is still just barely holding on, and you sort of respect Pink more for it because you know he's trying to crawl out of his desperation. And then the longest song on the album comes in not long after with Comfortably Numb, which is, again, one of my favorite songs on the album. There's a lot of good songs on this album, and Comfortably Numb is the longest of them. Pink is disturbed by his manager who wants him to go out on stage and perform like he is supposed to, but because Pink is completely self-isolated and giving up on life, he kind of refuses to do so. So the manager comes into his room and brings in a doctor to give him a drug, so Pink will be forced to go out there and perform like he has to. And once this drug is into Pink, he not only feels numb from the drug, but completely numb to all emotion in general. This state of complete and utter failure and sadness in Pink's life has made all emotions numb to him. He is no longer necessarily pained by his past or pained by his present, but instead he is completely just numb to all of it. And it is really, again, adding on to Pink's depression and mental stability, which is at an all-time low. This is quickly shifted around, though, and perhaps, in my opinion, too quickly by the following tracks. Because with the songs The Show Must Go On, In the Flesh, Run Like Hell, and Waiting for Worms, Pink now takes on this fascist dictatorship-like persona in front of his audience. He has completely lost his marbles, in a sense, and has taken on this almost dominant role. And to me, this is kind of a weird moment for the album, because even though instrumentally everything is great, vocally everything is perfect and top-notch, storytelling-wise and narratively, along with this album, this part feels like a weak moment and feels too quick of a shift in tone for him to go from this deep and utter despair all the way to this almost dominant fascist-like view. I don't know if it's just too sudden or if that's sort of the intention. Because obviously in reality, we've seen this with real-life people who have been in these depths of despair and have completely shifted to this maniacal, insane-like persona. So I don't know if maybe it's just a me thing not quite fully understanding it, or if I think this is just not developed well enough, but I think it might just be a bit of both. I would have liked if there was more time taken for him to develop these fascist-like behaviors. But even still, this fascist behavior is something that parallels the teachers that Pink dealt with in his life as a child, and it's interesting to see him both hate these teachers while at the same time becoming the very thing he hates. But everything comes to a close with the song Stop, a very short 30-second track where he is sort of going back into his psyche and taking a further and deeper look at his mind. And this turns right into the next song, The Trial. The Trial is perhaps the strongest moment on the album for Pink mentally, and is the most pivotal moment. It is the end, it is the climax, it is everything coming to a halt as Pink now looks at himself and completely reevaluates his entire life in this trial-like fashion. Everyone from Pink's life who has developed and been part of this wall is there to sort of judge him and decide his sentence in a way, and decide what he must do going forward. His wife is there, his mother's there, the teachers are there, and they are all heavily criticizing Pink in such a strong and hateful way, except for his mother, who is still sheltering him and almost nurturing him, as these people are berating him with these angry and hateful reactions. But ultimately, this song says that it is not the fault of the people who hurt him, but is kind of Pink's fault for sort of reacting the way he did. Pink has made all the wrong choices in life up to this point, and this entire wall was built because of him and his mother alone, really. Mostly himself, though. Because yes, he can pinpoint a lot of it on his mother, but he still has failed to examine and look at all these choices made against him in a reasonable way. He constantly blames his wife and his teachers for all this sort of self-isolating ways that he's developed, when in reality it is all entirely on him and his failure to react the proper way, which is to accept it and move on. You can't change these choices made against him, and he has to sort of just accept them, because the only other option is to go insane, which Pink is sadly doing throughout this whole album. It's a lesson that I think a lot of people could take into their life and learn, because it is just so important to realize that at the end of the day, you can't change the past and you can't change the choices made against you, so you must accept it and live with it, or else you will go mad. And so finally, throughout this sort of crazy and disturbing trial where their voices are almost performance-like in this operatic-like fashion, they decide his final sentence. They all surround him, and you feel like it's almost like a spotlight on Pink throughout this entire song. You feel as if you are at this trial and everyone is just hating on him in the center of it, because this is handled in a theater-like fashion. And finally, their sentence is that Pink must tear down his wall. He must tear it down and accept his entire life and embrace it rather than shut himself away. And so, the final song does just that. He's torn down the wall, and now he is, as this final track says, outside the wall. He is free from all this insanity. It's a really great way to end the album, and really feels as if Pink is finally given the freedom and almost happiness he enjoys, at least the contentness that he should have. And even though this album ends with Pink being free of this insanity and free of this wall, it still decides to end things in sort of a bittersweet and sad way, because the final lyric on this whole thing, just as the song is entering out, it says, "Isn't this where?" Which might seem sort of weird and like a fragmented piece of lyrics, like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but the beginning of this entire album actually opens up with the end of this sentence, "We came in." So, "Isn't this where we came in?" is really the full sentence that is being formed here, and implies that this album is actually more of a loop of sorts. The end of this album goes right into the beginning, implying heavily that this wall will be rebuilt again, that this entire process will repeat in Pink's life, because no matter what, he really can't let go of the past. It is fully ingrained in him at this point. And it's a constant struggle throughout his life to accept the past and these choices made against him. He really should accept it, because that's the only way he can be free. But no matter what, the wall will be built and tore down over and over and over again throughout his whole entire life. It's extremely sad and extremely bitter, and a sort of cynical way to look at things in the end, but it is extremely honest and blunt and truthful in a way. So honestly, overall, this album is maybe the single strongest concept album of all time, at least one of the strongest. I can think of a few that are on par or better, but still, this narrative is told so incredibly well from beginning to end, and there are so many small, short tracks that I didn't even really delve into, which are wedged between the longer tracks and just continually build on this narrative. I feel like the story you're getting here is like a very well-written novel, to be honest. It is so just powerful overall, and I love how effective this album is. So finally, the soft rating of this album came to a 9.9. The only reason I would ding a 0.1 off really is because I think the fascist section is a little too underdeveloped really, and is where the album gets a bit messier of sorts. And there are a couple of songs like Hey You, which do feel a bit weaker to me, at least personally. And of course, the hard rating, I'm going to harden up to a 10. I do think it's a soft rating 9.9 and a hard rating 10 out of 10. So, of course, with it being so well received by myself, I'm going to go ahead and say E for essential. This is one of Pink Floyd's best albums and is not to be missed out on. It is brilliant from beginning to end. And that pretty much does it for this review. Let's go ahead and see what the next album you're going to listen to is in the 1001 albums to listen to before you die book. Random number generator, 1 to 1001, generate. 483 is the next one. 483. 483 being Soft Cell's Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret. So go ahead and listen to that, and I'll review it in exactly 1 week from now. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this video. Like the video if you like it. Leave your opinion about this album in the comment section below. Subscribe if you want to follow along in listening to every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die book. And of course, my name is Randy Joe, and I'm signing off.